Hey Elliot, how you doing?
Good, Ed. How are you?
Good, thanks for coming on the show.
Glad to be here.
So tell us about yourself.
I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and I've been an Orlando native or Orlando resident for about 24 years now.
Gotcha. So you were born in Miami, Florida. What era of Miami did you grow up in Miami?
I got to see some of the fun stuff. I was there in the early 80s and mid 80s and saw a lot of the growth in the city and a lot of growth and development and a lot of kind of some wild times here and there. Not me personally, but some stuff going on. The Miami Vice era.
That's cool. So um now I know you're in construction and contracting. Did you do that as a child or did your family do that? How did you get the bug to be the kind of an entrepreneur?
My father was a union electrician his whole life. He studied electrical engineering and ended up having to drop out for some family matters and ended up just staying as an electrician. He worked at Mount Sinai Hospital for about the last 18 years of his career. But as a kid, I went to a lot of neighbors and friends' houses when they had small issues like ceiling fans not working or lights dimming and small electrical things that you would get in a normal home. And so my dad was very much the kind of person that would give you the tools and show you how to do things and show you how to be safe. And so I was working in panels when I was before I had a driver's license, really.
So were you like middle school, high school when you got jumped into helping out your dad, or was it a
Yeah,
little bit
I,
earlier?
I was. I know I was on the runway at Orlando International Airport when I was like 11. My dad got a call one night to go out and look at some lights on the airport tarmac that had gone out, and his company was he didn't work at the airport typically. He worked there sometimes, but they got an emergency call, and of course, when lights go out in a runway, and he's like, "Hey kid, you want to go? You want to go out to the airport?" I'm like 11 years old and going out to the airport, and there's planes flying over you, 1,000 yards over your head. And I remember we went to like a building that was out on the kind of out on the runway out there, and he went inside, and I didn't get out of the truck. I wasn't, he wasn't like dangerous with things, but interesting experiences like that, or you know, I definitely cherish.
That's cool. So did you go to school the following day and be like, I had flyer planes flying 1,000 feet over my head, or how was that like? Did you share any of that with your
I don't
classmates?
know. I guess I can't really recall that specifically. I don't really remember. I'm sure I mentioned it to some of my friends. But I actually went to a private school, so a lot of my I was definitely the only blue collar kid in my school. A lot of my parents' friends were, attorneys and uh, optometrists and things like that. I just happened to kind of be in this in between stage, so I did went to a private school and my dad was an electrician, so it was what it was. And, grew into some interesting relationships over the years from people that had full college scholarships and things like that that were a little different than my life, but, nothing bad.
So it's safe to say you got a hard working ethic from your parents. Did you have any like small side gig, side hustle type of businesses you started up when you were a kid?
I did. I was detailing cars actually when I was about, I want to say somewhere around 13 or so. I was detailing vehicles. My neighbors, I lived in a neighborhood that happened to have a lot of kind of retirees and older couples. And so they were just happy to get their car washed and they were happy to kind of give the money to a local kid. And so I had a basket full of soaps and detergent and Armor All and that kind of stuff. And so I was detailing cars when I was 13 for cash, and then turned it into a little bit of grass mowing and things like that. Just anything to kind of keep me busy and make some money. And I like to buy things. I mean, I like to have a nice bicycle at the time. I like to have I wanted to. I remember my mom wouldn't give me a pair of Reebok pump shoes, and so I worked and bought them. They were 150. I remember they were $115. And I made enough money and just bought them myself. My mom kind of did the old, well, if you want them, you got to buy them. And I was like, all right. So I bought them.
Yeah, you're like, hold my root beer, watch this. So You went from elementary school, middle school, working with your parents, doing different things, having odd jobs at side gigs you created yourself. Did you go to college? If so, where'd you go to?
Went to Miami-Dade Community College. Still worked. By then, I got a job at a local swimming pool store.
Okay.
So I was. It was a swimming pool store, but we also sold barbecue grills, mostly Weber and Charbroil. We were a dealer for both of those companies, and so I ran the barbecue department. By the time I was probably been there about a year, I was running the barbecue department.
And how
Uh,
old were you at that time?
oh, let's see. I was probably talking 18, 19 at that point.
Okay, that's cool. So, you were slowly starting to understand management. You had a background understanding in sales. You had a hard working ethic from your parents growing up. Uh, After you graduated from school, where did you go next? What was your next step? And
I actually got into the restaurant industry. I'd always been kind of a night owl
hmm
by nature, and so I got into the restaurant industry, and found out I could work till about midnight. I had a pretty good engine on me. I could run till about midnight, and so I was doing some private bartending, and
hmm
I was doing some. Private bartending was a great gig that I really liked, and it's going to really nice homes. I've always had a lot of being in Miami and being. I was around a lot of very nice things. There was Lamborghinis rolling up and down the street.
That's cool.
There was always My mom worked at Miami Beach on a private island at one point. So I've always definitely had, not that I've wanted to be a multimillionaire, but I always had a little bit of a taste and flavor for things that were nicer, and a little bit, it's I didn't grow up in a bad area, but it's always important to see like a nice mansion or a really nice house and kind of see how things could be if you try to be successful.
Gotcha. So do you just to roll back the clock for a second? Do you have any crazy stories from your time when you were working in the bar? Because I know there's always a couple that are out there.
Um, I had an off-duty police officer one time decide he wanted to pull his shirt off to get in a fight, and a gun went rolling across the ground between him and the guy he was fighting, and or trying to get in a fist fight with. And instead of going for him, I went for the gun. So I just swooped right in between them, scooped the gun up, and then the guys that were working security with me took care of grabbing them. So that was a fairly surreal incident. Nothing, nothing too off the charts. It was a neighborhood local bar.
Gotcha.
There was we had a couple fist fights, a couple mad boyfriend type scenarios. People drink too much. Um, but I think the gun rolling across the floor it was one of those things where it happened because he literally pulled his shirt off, and I remember it must have been tucked in his waistband or whatever the case was. And you're just standing there, and you do that thing of like, you look and you're like, am I really like, did I really just see a gun just like, or,
Slide
or
past me.
yeah, like roll in front of me, like a foot away from me? Not that I'd never seen a gun before, but in the situation, it was just kind of surreal. Um, but
Gotcha.
I always worked with a lot of very close group people. So we had like a staff of like 20 at the bar, that we were all pretty close. The pool store I worked at, we actually had two locations. There was probably 20 of us. So I always worked in places. I've never been a fan of working in like a giant corporation. I think I've been lucky. I've always worked in places where I knew the owner, and I knew, my coworkers and subordinates, and in a good situation.
Gotcha. That's cool. So like it seems like every time you get into an employment opportunity as a young person, you were like always seen as the manager type. Do you have a certain personality style that kind of
Yeah,
brings that out?
absolutely. I always feel that there's ways to make things better. There's always ways. The first thing I did when I got in charge of the barbecue department at the pool store was I took down, we had a huge parts department, and I took down everything in the parts department on this whole wall, and it was probably 40 feet long. And I just reorganized the entire wall because over the years it was just haphazardly, one thing was added, one thing was added, nothing was done with any organization. So I'm not fanatical about it, but I do think that if you have a neat and organized space, be it a fire truck or a pool store or a restaurant. Even when I worked into my bar, I always kept my bar very, um, in order. Like you actually keep your speed racks like in the same order, so you're not looking down, you're not having to look down all the time. And
Hmm.
I definitely probably could have had a career in, engineering where you engineer things to work better and all that. I didn't get into it, but it's something that I'm interested in.
That's cool. So, it sounds like you're very organized. You're a natural manager. At what point in time did you say, "Okay, I'm doing these different career options," and say, "I'm going to switch gears and sort of go back to my roots when I was with my dad doing contracting work and open that door up and sort of walk through it?"
I was working on a management team at my restaurant, and there was five gentlemen on the team, and I was the only one that wasn't divorced.
Okay.
So that's a true story. There was four gentlemen that were either divorced or going through divorces, and myself. And so the restaurant hours and schedule and thing was a big part of, obviously, maybe not everything involved in every relationship, but obviously helped fracture the relationship. Um, and so I decided I was going to settle down and get married. I was already dating my wife, and
Hmm.
I decided that it was time to drop the industry where, everybody, didn't have a great home life, and you have to work Valentine's Day, Father's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. It's challenging in the restaurant industry because the things that a lot of people look forward to, you don't look forward to. Um, I, I
Gotcha.
I dreaded working New Year's Eve. It was probably the holiday I dreaded the most
Why?
because
Why did you dread it so much?
it's rookie night. It's the night that the people that don't usually drink go out to drink. It's
Hmm.
very crowded. Everybody pays their tab at the same time. It's not the end of the world, but it's very hard. You have to learn how to enjoy your life in different ways when you're in the restaurant industry, because you're not enjoying them in the ways that a lot of people would anticipate you enjoying them. Which, like for instance, going out for Father's Day to take your dad out for Father's Day. For me, I was working till 11 o'clock that night, and I'd been there since 10 o'clock that morning. So,
So it was a super
a little
long,
different.
long day. Did you have any shocking stories from like being at a New Year's celebration or a holiday celebration that just always stuck in your mind?
Well, actually, I decided to quit on a Christmas Eve. I was at the restaurant by myself, closing. It was just me and a dishwasher in the building. All the cooks had gone home. It was coming up on midnight, and I just couldn't get my money, my end of night money and stuff was not right. There was just something wrong. We never had money problems, and it was just a particular. There was a little bit of money missing, basically. Um, and so I went through it two or three times trying to figure out what was going on. It kept getting later. You're getting more tired. You're getting more, you've been there 10, 11, 12 hours. So I finally just basically closed it up and called it a night. But I left the restaurant after midnight on a Christmas Eve, and I just decided that that was probably going to be, kind of how my life was going to go from there if I didn't make a change. And if you don't make a change, you're never gonna get a change. And so, that was kind of that night. I kind of decided, like, okay, I've given this career a good run. I was doing some consulting, for some other restaurants in the area, some local restaurants. But those also, restaurant consultants also work the same hours that restaurants work. So no matter what, you're just kind of not going to get away from it. And so, it's kind of like a fireman trying to get away from a fire. So I just decided that that was it. And, I actually left the day before Valentine's Day that following year, or Christmas Eve, and then I kind of put in my notice in early January, and I left. Um, and right before my last day was February 13th.
So how long did it take for you to say, you know what, I'm switching gears and becoming a business owner? Did you do it right away? Did you find someone to partner up
I
with?
joined, I joined my business partner, my current business partner. He had an existing business. He was working within four management companies that We're turning property, what we call turning rentals. So we started turning. He was already doing it, and I joined him. But he was basically, a tenant would move out of the home. We would go into the home, assess the home, and then make recommendations on what the home needed to be rent ready again. It was a point in history where a lot of the homes were renting for quite a bit more than they had been. So a tenant would move out that was saying paying say 800 a month, and the next tenant was going to be paying like 1100 a month. So there was a lot of room for improvement. We had about at one point we had about 1,000 properties that were under us, and they all turned, different months of the year. Different months were slower and faster, but overall there was a lot to do. Um,
Could you explain what the turning process was, what you would look to improve upon in an apartment or a unit for me?
Definitely the aesthetics, anything to do with a lot of them got paint. I mean, historically, when a
Hmm.
home's had a tenant for, if it's a year, maybe you're not going to paint, but if it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years, for the most part, you're going to see a paint job's going to come into play. Um, you can change cabinet handles, faucets are leaking. A lot of people tenants, for the most part, tenants live with things a little more than you would if you just have never been there before. So you
And
would
why
go
do you think
in.
that is? Right.
I think it's everything. I mean, a tenant is really nothing more than a hotel room that's been there for a year. So
Gotcha.
people don't own the property. If the management company isn't um, responsive to maintenance requests, then a lot of times you can have situations where they called and said, hey, this broke, and no one ever comes out to fix it, or the work order gets lost, or whatever the case may be. So you can go into a home and, the garbage disposal didn't work, the faucet leaked,
Hmm.
uh, the back patio hadn't been pressure cleaned in months,
Hmm.
the dog had jumped through the screens. I mean, there was just you know, a lot of things that needed it. I mean, we had jobs. I mean, we had a house that we put 11 pallets of sod down because
Wow.
the yard was just a sand pit. It was down south Orlando, but it varies, and people always give tenants a hard time. But from where I stand, I think that people all try to live their lives, and if you call and something doesn't get fixed, and you call and something else doesn't get fixed, eventually you just kind of quit calling because you figure, well, what's the point?
Hmm.
It's your house anyway. And it's like if you stayed in a hotel for the weekend and you called down to the front desk and said, hey, the hot water doesn't work or something, then if after a while you're like, well, whatever, we're checking out Monday. So
Yeah, of course, they just don't really have the ownership in it.
yeah, and I worked with some really good property managers that really tried hard, and they're limited to their owners too. So it's a tough industry because you have two bosses. You have
Hmm.
your landlord or your owner, and then you have your tenant or tenants. And so there's a lot of people kind of coming at you in different directions. I've seen great owners that have added a lot of value to their properties, and I've seen owners that won't put a dime into them and will run them into the ground to the point of like 40 and $50,000 losses. So it's
So
a
that
different.
begs a question. If I was a landlord or someone listening was a landlord, what are the top five things that someone could do to actually increase the property value of their unit?
Surfaces that like granite countertops, for instance. It
Hmm.
sounds simple, but we used to see so many back then. We used to see a lot of units that had a lot of laminate countertops. Um, Keeping up your landscaping and shrubbery, for whatever
Hmm.
reason, everybody misses it. I'm always a proponent of at least keeping it trimmed and neat, keeping mulch in the beds, keeping gutters on your home so that the water doesn't just make huge holes in the ground, as you know from all the storms and everything lately.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just keeping up with general maintenance. The expression that makes me cringe that I've heard 100 times is, "Oh, it's only a rental property," and only a rental property is still in today's market is three or $400,000.
Hmm.
And so I've asked people, I said, well, if you had a $200,000 Ferrari, would you just let anybody drive it? And they say, well, no, of course not. And I was like, well, why? why would you say it's only a like it's only a rental property is just a is a really it's kind of a dumb statement. I mean, you got a three or
Hmm.
$400,000 investment, and somebody says, hey, there's a roof leak, and you're like, oh, whatever, I'll get it fixed next year, kind of thing. It's just it's a really the damage that gets caused is always worse than the repair that could have been made.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So, my question to you is just rolling back the clock for a second. You met your current business partner. How'd you guys connect? How'd you guys get to introduce each other?
When I was at the restaurant, it it needed some maintenance around the restaurant. Actually, there were some things that had we didn't really have a local maintenance team,
Hmm.
and the restaurant's out of business. It's no longer an in business chain, but it really needed some freshening up. It was an older unit. It had doors that were off hinges and things like that. But the worst problem we had is we had peanuts on the floor,
Hmm.
and the oil from the peanuts would go out onto the patio. And so our front patio was actually kind of slippery.
Really? Huh.
And yeah, because you get so much peanut oil that it would actually, it wasn't super slippery, but it didn't look good. It was very dark. It would get very oily. And it's like an olive oil. Peanut oil and olive oil and vegetable oil are all, pretty close.
Yeah.
So one day, my business partner backed his truck because he already did this work. He backed up to have
Hmm.
lunch, and in his truck he had a pressure cleaning rig, a floor scrubber, and a full setup. And I walked over to him, and I was the manager, and I said, hey, I knew him by name and everything. And I said, hey, if you guys want to come early one morning and pressure clean all these walkways for me outside, I'll give you free lunch for a week. And because I wanted my unit to look good, we were getting complaints. I mean, it was a restaurant where you'd walk up and you would, again, people just not being serious enough about running a restaurant unit. A large corporation would never let a walkway be filthy, or back then wouldn't have let it be filthy. And so they obviously took the opportunity and said, absolutely. So they came out early. One morning I was opening, and they came out early, and they pressure cleaned the whole walkway off, from the all where you kind of came up to the door and everything. Not the whole building, but just where you walked. And of course, it looked amazing because it hadn't been done in like as long as I'd worked there. So like at least 2 or 3 years, it had never been done. And amazingly, this company went out of business. Imagine that. So they fixed some other things. The dumpster gates were off, and different things around the building. Some tiles were loose in the kitchen on the floor and things like that, just helping us out. And so I knew them that way. And then when I had decided to move into a different business, I had reached out to them to see if they kind of want, because they were doing handyman work, which for me was really simple. Like I basically there was things I could show him on electrical. There was things I knew about electrical that he didn't know, and there's things he knew about plumbing that I didn't know. So it was a particularly good blend of intelligence and knowledge, and all that good stuff.
What was your wife's reaction to see like, hey, I'm making this bold step forward in my career? What was her reaction to you to going
Actually
forward with
funny.
this?
So when I got engaged to my wife, I was actually jobless. So I quit the restaurant industry, and we went on a 10-day trip to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And so I've to this day will still kind of mention like, hey, you must have had a lot of faith in me, because when I asked you to marry me, I didn't even have a job. So when I came back from the 10-day vacation, um, with her, then we were engaged, and I called my now business partner and said, hey, if you want some help, coming up whenever you want somebody to jump in the truck with you on a bigger day or whatever, because he was busy, but he wasn't a major company either. He was a small operation, and so they were hands on. I mean, he did the pressure cleaning on the port, like he didn't have employees and all that stuff. So I basically told him, when you need help, let me know. And within a few days, I went out probably one day, and then didn't go out another day, and went out another day, and just kind of started kind of tagging along when time came. And I bought somewhere in there, I bought a truck, an SUV, and so I had a trailer. And there again, I just was able, so he was able to kind of start saying, hey, why don't you go pressure clean that sidewalk? I'm going to go over here and get this done. And then it eventually turned into business partners and all that.
Cool. So, you said you did the basics and then you went to turning units. At what point in time did you sort of say we're going to take it to the next level and start getting more into mainstream renovations for residential properties along that line?
We had some rental properties that were so outdated that they needed kitchens, they needed bathrooms, the tile was falling off the walls, literally. Tubs were rusted, things like that. Things that simply couldn't just be fixed quickly, with nothing, beyond just regular repair.
So, did
So
these people come and find you, or were they rental properties at that time?
they were already rental properties. So they were historically, a lot of them were like 7 and 8 year type rentals. So we would do a lot of these properties where somebody had lived there for 7 or 8 years as a tenant, and you walk in, and again, people are people. Like, some of them were completely destroyed, some of them were very much just normally used. So we got a hold of, like, we had a guy that did a lot of carpet for it. This is still before luxury vinyl plank. So we did a lot of carpet. We did a lot of painting, a lot of painting. We literally were burning up a sprayer, like a paint sprayer, like every year. We were buying paint sprayers pretty much annually and kept upgrading, trying to find one that we could keep up with us. Getting into some duplicates of things. Like, I know we got two pressure cleaners pretty early on, just because one pressure cleaner would be needed over here and one was needed over there, and it was just easier to kind of have two, and especially if one broke down. So just normal business growth. But it all came through the management companies for a long time, and it was easier to go. So we had property managers that had somewhere between 50 and 150 properties. So each property manager, it was easier to do business with one property manager who said, hey, this month I've got property A, property B, and property C coming vacant. And then we, that it's an easier, so in other words, one person had three houses that needed renovating versus going around town and finding clients. It's a very easy fit if you just want to do the work. We didn't have to meet. We really almost never met the owners. It was just a very easy fit to just look at the property, write the quote, and uh, if the quote got approved, we did all the work. And then the thing that my partner had started that we kept up with was we turned the property over completely ready. So we didn't leave any stone unturned. We checked everything. We checked some out. We didn't do a home inspection, but we came close. We really made sure that all the lights worked, all the outlets worked, the garbage disposal worked, the dishwasher worked. We kind of just, as we were finishing the project, we were very careful to kind of go through and make sure that everything was very in use. And so the property managers very quickly learned that if Dwayne and Elliot had done the unit, all of a sudden they didn't get a phone call.
You had a great reputation with your actual business relationships with the property managers. At what point in time do you start growing to a place where you're saying like, okay, we can have multiple crews going because we're like growing and things are getting better and better and better.
Yeah, we did. We decided to kind of keep it going. We believed in investing in the business and all that stuff. So we bought extra vehicles. We started a payroll. We got guys on workers' comp. Um, we we did all those steps. We had somebody. We finally got people in the off. We got an office staff. So we had people answering the phones, fielding the work orders. We also did service calls at the time. So if somebody did move in and had an issue, we would go back and fix things and address things. But we still would uphill anything that was too electrical, too much, like we wouldn't snake drains, we wouldn't change breakers, we're not doing electric, like heavy electrical or anything that was too
What, why,
heavy.
why did you decide that was a cutoff point not to do that type of stuff?
It's just it's partial legality and partial, you really
Okay.
need somebody that knows what they're doing. At a certain point, you just really need to know when it's time to let a plumber get involved, or like if somebody called and said,
Hmm.
hey, like half the lights in the house just went out, and the panels, like I had a call one night, somebody got hit by lightning. And it was a little bit weird because it was um it was not in the rain. So
Hmm.
lightning doesn't always hit during the rainstorms. It literally was like one of these, like it almost rained, but there was some lightning. And so we got a call. It was a house in Winter Park that we'd worked on, and I go over there and I open the panel, and I immediately knew what I was looking at. There was burn marks on the panel.
Wow.
It was literally smoking still when I got there, and I turned the power off and I said, you need to call an electrician, because again, we're not overstepping bounds. We're not doing anything that we weren't certified for. And so
Gotcha.
and management companies still have, I mean, they still have those resources. They still had electricians, they still had plumbers. Um, but then my business partner decided in 2013, he decided to get his general contracting license. And that's when we went from being a management company resource to a general contracting company.
So jumping to the general contracting company, that opened more doors for you, and how did that affect your um, business model? Like, I guess it helped it in a positive way, but what was one of the things that you said, okay, now that we're GCs, we're going to start targeting this area of contracting work?
At the time we did it, it was just a very busy time. We had a lot of connections with real estate. We had people that we'd worked with that had gone on to other things. It was almost too strong when we first started. We got the contracting license. We had some trades that we knew, guys that were electricians, guys that were plumbers. We kind of asked around, hey, do you know anybody else that's an electrician? But we came out of the gate we already, we were already in the industry, and we'd been in it for, 10 or 12 years. So we came out of the gate really strong. We built some additions right away. We found an engineer, so he was calling us. I don't know if you want to call it lucky or what, but we almost were too busy the first year. We had to really learn where we could focus our project management, because
Yeah.
we got all these jobs and we started getting them done. And when you go from a rental maintenance job to building a addition on a house job, the timelines are obviously wildly different.
Yeah, of course.
But we got them all done. We were very hands on. My business partner would be at one project, I'd be at another. A lot of times, of course, that's not just, my day isn't one project, though. Sometimes it's three or four or five if we had teams working on different projects. If you manage things well, and again, organize things well, you can succeed. And so we just kept making sure everything was getting done. We were making sure we were meeting the inspectors. We asked a lot of questions. And again, inspectors get kind of a bad rap in the world. People kind of grumble like, "Oh, I got this inspector and he failed me for something." And I'm like, "Well, what did he fail you for?" And it's like, "Well, this thing wasn't done right." And you're like, kind of their job.
Yeah, you got to
So
have that quality control in place.
yeah, but if you meet the inspectors, a lot of times they're like older guys that have been in the industry a while, so they can show you things like, hey, you should have gone ahead and put some, coating over here, but I'll pass it. But next time, so you can learn kind of from them too. So if you have an open mind and you're trying to learn from the people you're working with, and our trades were really strong. Like we didn't use like the electricians we used had been in business 5+ years, plumbers that had been in the business, 5+ years. So we weren't all going out together as the first, and it wasn't the first time we'd done things either. So if we opened up a wall, we knew what we were looking at. It was just, tuning it to being a general contractor.
Gotcha. So do you have any interesting stories? Because I can only imagine when you turn a property, flip a property, say, hey, we're going to step in there, you find some horror shows. Do you have any like really interesting and shocking stories of like walking into a place where you're just sort of like, I've never seen this?
I've seen it all. There was a house that had so much cigarette smoke that the walls were like two shades of orange. I mean, they
Really
were
orange?
like it was like sunburnt skin color
Oh
orange,
my gosh.
and it was a two-bedroom home, and at the time our quote was almost $30,000, and I wrote on the quote that I still wouldn't guarantee the smoke smell out.
Hmm.
I had a house in Windermere that still had a Rolls Royce and a Mercedes in the garage that were
Really?
from like the 80s. Um,
Did the
it
owner
was
passed away or something, or what was the
It
story
was
with that?
an odd situation. It was like it was a. I've run into a few of these. The son owned a chain of hotels in South Florida,
Hmm.
and he bought this home for his parents, but they like never left South Florida. But for some reason, their cars were here. I don't know if the cars were here for like when they were here or what.
Hmm.
Um, but they were like covered in dust and literally like a barn find looking car. Um, I've seen every level of I hate to say it, but pets living. Like I've seen houses where three and four and five dogs were living there. Um, I've been in houses that have burned, that have had
Hmm.
kitchen fires. We had a gentleman that was sitting in his living room and he got up to go check on something in his kitchen, and a car came through his front living room right
Wow.
into his living room, and the couch that he was sitting on was pinned up against the wall. A kid had stolen a vehicle and had crashed into his house. We had one where a tree clipped the corner of a roof pretty good. A pretty good sized tree had come down and it just caused astronomical damage to the corner of a home.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I've seen, and I do. Um, it, it's something you have to learn when you go to someone's house and it like flooded. Like we've just had all these hurricanes, but
Hmm.
when a house floods, like just for like a plumbing flood, it's a challenging scenario because you're walking into someone's house and like all their stuff's up on the couch or like on the counters, and they've tried to like move stuff around, and a lot of times they weren't home when it happened. So things like that are very hard on people, and we get comfortable in our homes, especially our residences that we've lived in a long time, and so you have to, and you have to go in and be cognizant of that and understand that you're there to help people, but also they kind of will look at you like you're there, like you're going to make some money on the fact that their house flooded. So all those conversations are a little hard to have, but if you can go in and like help them understand what's going on.
Hmm.
We did pair up with some restoration companies at one point. We haven't done it lately, but we worked with companies that did fire, water, mold cleanup, and then we would go in and put the drywall back and outlet covers back on and baseboard and doors and that kind of thing.
So, backing up a minute, you mentioned that you dealt with home fires in the kitchen. Like, how much work is it really? Like, do you have to replace the beams and the studs from a fire, or like I've heard stories where like the actual when the wood gets charred, it's good because it keeps ants and termites away and stuff. Like, I don't know what's true anymore.
Fires are very important. I actually, when I speak to realtors and or investors about fires, fires are very challenging because they can get they're very exponential. So a 2-minute fire in your kitchen,
Hmm.
basically like a lot of cleaning, and like if you have a stove fire where you have something on the grill and you're cooking eggs or whatever the case may be, and it gets all smoky, that's basically like a cleanup.
Hmm.
But when the fire penetrates the ceiling and it starts getting in the attic, then that's when you can really get the cost and challenges get exponential. So to your question, once that a roof truss gets burned, then it has to be looked at by an engineer, and then if it's lost its structural integrity, then it really starts to become a process. And then at a certain point, your home, even if you only burn, for instance, if you only burn the garage, I have a local home here in Winter Springs that
Hmm.
um, a garage got hit by lightning and it caught on fire. But that what that means is you got to rewire the entire home. You have to repipe the entire home. You have to re-roof the entire home. So those things are not for somebody that's never done it. If you've never, I've had investors that have bought a burnt home and they thought they were going to like flip it, and I'm like, this just needs to go in a dumpster.
Hmm.
This is simply there. It's going to cost you more to rehab this than it will be to just grade it to the ground and start over, because you have to fix every system in the home. And air conditioning, when a house catches on fire, there's heat,
Hmm.
obviously. So historically, your air conditioner is going to kick on. And that's worse because what it does is it pulls all the smoke and it blows it through every room in the house. So even if you have not, like, for instance, you have a back bedroom where there's no fire, but
Yeah.
you're going to get smoke damage. So
Gotcha.
I will tell you, the thing is true about having your doors closed. Like when you go to bed at night, to have all your doors closed. I've seen that in person where you have a fire and the one side of the door has burn and the other side of the door is like it never happened. So
Wow.
that's actually a truth, that if you keep your doors closed, you can minimize the spread of the fire, because the fire has to spread through the rooms.
Hmm.
So, and I'm very serious about smoke alarms. I've had clients and landlords argue, changing smoke alarm batteries and things like that, and I won't even negotiate it. It's getting done because
Gotcha.
I've actually been in a house fire.
Really? What was that like?
So we had a unit in Lake Mary that, the tenant was moving in, and his he complained about his fence not opening and closing properly. And my partner and I, this is a long time ago when it was still him and I, we went to work on the fence, and it was on the side of the home. It was just a wooden gate. And we went to kind of like tighten up the bolts and just get it all kind of, it was kind of like on the ground,
Hmm.
and we hear a loud click. It almost sounds like a shotgun, chambering like a shotgun, like a really loud click, but we really didn't recognize the sound. And the tenant had told us like, "Hey, I gotta go back to my other house. I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm just moving some stuff over."
Gotcha.
So we're like, okay. And then all of a sudden we can smell, there's a very obviously clear and distinct smell to a house on fire. So luckily he'd left the house unlocked, because I don't think we could have solved it otherwise. So we're like, wow, that kind of smells funny. So we walk back around the front of the house and we're like, no, there's a definite smell. And we come in the front door and the kitchen stove was on fire. And it wasn't because he was cooking. He had set a brown Publix bag on the stove, and it had kind of tumbled. It was full of cans, and it had tumbled over, and it had turned a burner on. So the burner caught the bag on
Did he
fire.
do that intentionally?
No, no, he just was packing stuff. He was like moving into his kitchen. So he just, like, he had brought boxes and he put the boxes on the counter, and he had just kind of, I guess he'd run out of boxes. So he had put, some cans, just some canned food in these bags. And one of the bags must have fallen just the right way to like kick this burner on, and the burner caused the fire. So kind of comically, it had one of these little tiny squirters on the kitchen sink. So instinctively you just kind of grab for whatever water there is. So I turn on the kitchen faucet and we take this little squirter out, that's like this little thing you would rinse off like a plate with.
Yeah, I know
Or
what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, we're like in the old school, really old. So, and there's only two of us there, and I'm like trying to get the water to like get over to the stove. Luckily, it's kind of getting there, but it's like obviously not like a fire hose.
Hmm.
I tell my partner, I said, "Here, you take this. I've got a fire extinguisher in my truck." I always carry a fire extinguisher because I was actually part of a car fire many, many, many years ago. So he takes over this little tiny piddly sprayer thing, which is keeping it from getting a lot worse, but not stopping it. And I run to the truck. I get the fire extinguisher, and the fire extinguisher, fortunately, is a lot more potent, and we were able to just get the fire out. So we called the fire department, and the tenant comes home. Like, as the tenant comes home, there's literally like two fire engines in front of his house. But it was a very serious, wake up call, as far as the smoke really piles up very quickly. It was a vaulted ceiling house, kind of like an 80s house. Um, the smoke really very, very, very quickly. There's smoke. It's and mind you, we were wide awake and everything. So these house fires that happen at night, I mean, it's a scary situation. It was scary as it was with nobody home and being alert, awake, and all of a sudden having to deal with this. So we get the fire out. The firemen come. We don't touch anything because we didn't want to, obviously corrupt anything. They took a FLIR out and they said, yeah, that can right there is the hottest can. So that's that bag caught on fire. And then they
Hmm.
pulled it back and they were, the plastics all melted and everything at that point. But it was very enlightening. I mean, it's not something I ever want to relive, but it's fast. It was, I mean, the entire scenario was probably a minute and a half, and it felt like 15 minutes. I mean, there's a lot going on, and the smoke's coming. The smoke was probably 6 feet down from the ceiling, so it
Really?
was.
It
Oh
was
yeah,
getting
it
up
was.
there.
Oh yeah, it gets there quick. And I immediately ran and opened all the windows and closed all the bedroom doors and everything, trying to minimize the damage.
Hmm.
The gentleman ended up having to move back out, get the house repaired by a repair company, and then he moved back in. He lived there for a year and moved back out. And they got all new kitchen cabinets and everything out of it,
Hmm.
um, which we did not do. And what the going back to the click was the stove breaker shorting out, and so it was the 50 amp breaker for the stove reset, clearing, because the stove basically, once the stove caught on fire, it shorted out. So the click that we initially heard was the 50 amp breaker in the panel, but it just was such an odd sound in the middle of the day. It just didn't occur to us what we were hearing. And obviously there was nothing to connect it to. But ever since that event, obviously I always keep a fire extinguisher in my truck or any of my vehicles. Actually, I don't want to say my truck, but any vehicle I drive has a fire extinguisher in it because it's such an easy solution I mean, a $20 fire extinguisher, made a world of difference that day because I don't think we would have gotten the fire out with the little piddly hose.
Okay.
And
That's
but
interesting.
but we definitely, like, I will not do any renovation. If I do renovation work, we put in new smoke alarms. It's actually a Florida statute now that if you do any renovation on your home, you're supposed to change the smoke alarms. And so it kind of drives me crazy if I go to someone's house and I see they've got their smoke alarms because they were beeping. They'll take them down and throw them in a drawer, and I'm like, and again, we were wide awake. So to wake up in the middle of the night to a house fire is something that I would never wish on anybody.
I follow. So that's pretty crazy. My other question I had, which you mentioned earlier, was in reference to not only a house fire, but you said you went into a houses. Were they like hoarder situations? Would
Oh
that
yeah.
be what was that like?
I've seen. I probably want to say I've been in 10 hoarder houses. Um, they're tough. They're very labor intensive. Um, they're they can vary from hoarding can vary from like keeping a lot of one item to keeping everything.
Hmm.
Um, I went to a house on the west side of town that the lady just had boxes in all her hallways.
Why?
So like
Just
just boxes. Like I didn't ask her what was in them, but so you like would walk down a very normal length width hallway.
yeah,
There
yeah.
was an entire stack of boxes next to you all the way down the hallway.
That's
And
crazy.
and then some of the rooms you literally couldn't even get you could the door was open to the room, but the
Hmm.
set foot in the room. It was literally all just assorted sizes of
Now,
boxes.
was that person an owner of the home or were they
They
renting?
were a tenant. That was actually a tenant.
Hmm.
I've been in homes and I've been in hoarder owners and I've been in hoarder tenants and then every sometimes it's just we had a house in College Park that was like newspapers. It was like they didn't own a trash can. There was newspapers and food wrappers and uh, just absolutely like everything you could think of that you would just assume you would like literally like they would just eat on the couch and just throw their wrapper next to them.
And not
So
think twice about it, and it would just sit there
yeah,
for years.
Yeah. Obviously in those houses you have to like we won't even give a repair assessment
Hmm.
until things are cleared out. Because you can't even really tell what you like in the house in College Park, the shower didn't even the shower had stuff in it. Like there was literally like you couldn't even stand in the shower. So you don't even
That's
want to
crazy.
imagine where all that stuff came and went.
So, I'm guessing these houses also had pest problems potentially. Do you deal with homes with pest problems, or when you're doing renovations and things along that line?
The worst that we've dealt with pests has definitely been the line of rats chew on wires and pipes.
Hmm.
And so you're in other words, the home does have pests, and we always leave pest control to some professionals. And pest control is definitely its own line of work, and there's
Hmm.
some great people out there doing it. But the rodents will eat wires and eat pipes, so they eat the insulation off the pipes and the wires. So rodents can actually cause fires because they'll strip the wires, and then the wires will shift just slightly, and they'll short out. So we had a house in the west side of town one time that we kept fixing all these leaks, and every time we'd pressure up the system, we'd find another leak and find another leak, and it turned out that the house was simply just overrun with rats, and the rats were chewing holes in the pipe, and it was basically a lost cause. And that house actually, I believe, just got sold. I think it got sold as is. It was in part of an insurance claim at the time, but I don't think the insurance company was going to pay, and I think the person who lived there was in care, and I think it had simply I think the home just got sold as is, whereas to an investor, which I also work. That's how I was able to be so fluid into when I got into home flipping. I was able to be very it was very fluid transition for me because I had already seen these homes, and so
Hmm.
it it was a very easy step to say, oh, this home needs this home needs that. And because we'd done them, and so it was very
Yeah.
easy to buy to
So,
flip.
when
Yeah.
did you decide to say, "Hey, I'm going to start flipping now because I have the experience to do so"? What year around was that?
That was around right when the market recovered from the bubble. I was in I was in the Wekiva Longwood area, and
Hmm.
I was painting a wall. I decided to flip house to get into learning how to flip houses when I was on a ladder one day, and I was painting a wall, and I remember exactly where I was, and a real estate couple had bought this home,
Hmm.
and it had been an REO. It had been a whole can't come up with the right word.
Investment property?
No, REO, owned by the bank, foreclosure. I
Okay.
don't know why I can't come up with it. It was a foreclosure. So I'm on this ladder. This real estate couple had bought this foreclosure, and the prior owner had like ripped their countertop off.
Hmm.
So they had hired us. We knew them already, and they had put on a countertop. There was like some mirrors missing in the bathroom. There was a couple of odds and ends, just really bizarre odds and ends. People had like stolen the towel bar. They're
That's
like, "Oh, I'm
bizarre.
getting my,"
Yeah.
foreclosures were very weird.
Hmm.
People were like, "Well, I own this home. I'm going to steal my towel bars." Like,
Hmm.
okay. So you'd go into a home and like the towel bars were ripped out of the wall, and like they took the countertop and the kitchen faucet. Like that was the kind of things you saw in REOs. Um, so I hear the couple talking to a prospective buyer, and the buyer walks in, and we had put the countertops back on, put new countertops on,
Hmm.
and we're painting some walls to freshen it up, and we are going to fix a couple items, like I said, like towel bars and things. And the buyer left, and the couple looked at each other, and they're like, "Oh, well, we're going to make like 22 grand on this house once we sell it." And they didn't mean it to be insulting to me or anything. They just were basically talking,
Yeah, they're
husband
just
and
like, "Hey, we made
wife.
20 grand on this. This is awesome."
We made 20 grand. So I'm looking around, and I'm like, well, this is, and again, I'm always looking for the next thing. So I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm on this ladder, and I'm like, I have the resources to call somebody to put a countertop on. Obviously, they're hiring me to do it,
Hmm.
and I can go into a home and assess what needs to be fixed and do it. So I started working with investors who buy flips and saying, hey, listen, if you buy this house, it's going to need this, 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 and this. It's going to cost you this much, but it also will sell for this much more. And
Hmm.
so ultimately, since from probably 06, 07 to now, I've done about 200 flips in some version of another. Sometimes they've been bought to be rentals, sometimes they bought to be resold. So we've done a lot of those over time. And we had investors that would come in and just buy REOs and make them rent ready, and make them a rental portfolio. I've helped people by one of our clients bought 40 condominiums off down in South Orlando. It was the last 40 condominiums in the complex. So there was like 450, 500 condos. And the company that was selling them wanted to get out. And so it was like the 40 worst condos that were in this whole place that all were like not quite done. But it was really bizarre because like you'd walk in and there'd be like a missing cabinet door, and there'd be like a cabinet door, but it didn't fit. So it was all the condos that were like almost done, but they weren't really done. And there was like, you know, this room had a fan and this room just had wires hanging from the ceiling. Um, and somebody that I'm still friends with now basically made a management agreement with this group of investors. So the group of investors pooled their money. They bought 40 condos. I believe they paid about 100 a piece for them. So I think they got together something like $4 million, and then they started, so we assessed them, and then we found what we did is we took the low hanging fruit. So we took the units that were closest to ready and made them ready so that they could of course get revenue. And then as we went through the process, we kept going and putting them online as some required more than others. And then eventually within about a year we had them, and some still had tenants for different reasons and stuff like that. But over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years, we painted and put online about 40 condos in the same complex, and they all had building number. And it actually was a little bit tough on accounting because each one had a unit number, so you had to be very diligent about which one you painted, which one you put a faucet in, which one you put carpet in, and all that. But that group did really well on those units because they're worth like 275, 300 now. I don't really know if they kept them all eventually, but I know that they all got occupied pretty much the day we finished painting them. They would get occupied within 5 to 7 days. It's a good complex. It's still a good complex. But it gives you a lot of practice, um, a lot of, a lot of day to day, a lot of things, lot of hurdles, and just kept figuring out how to get them the best, most effective way to get a unit online and the next one done. We actually painted every one the same color. So
Really,
we
is it just their efficiency purposes, or is that what they
absolutely
requested?
efficiency and also for the turn. So if you paint 40 units the same color, and obviously document that, then what happens when the tenants were moving out, you were very easy to touch up because you could just grab any bucket of paint that you had on any other site and go back and touch those up and then just keep going. So we just made it all one unit, one color. They all got painted the same color, and then we just kept that as a just like you would do in a hotel or anywhere else where you have commonality, in the visuals of it.
That's interesting. So you started doing home flipping. It sounds like you had major success doing the flips. And are you still doing that, or what are you evolving to today? Like, what's your next evolution that you see VE kind of going towards?
We've already done a few, and it looks like we're going to be doing more. We're definitely doing some ground up construction stuff. We have a couple of designs on our books right now that we're already contracted to build. Um, Ground up building, although it is just as challenging as everything else, it's a little easier than renovations because you don't have to inherit anything. If you flip or remodel a 1950, I'm working on a house right now that I looked it up today. It's built in 1955. So you're inheriting, not only you're inheriting something that's 70 years old, but you're also inheriting all the other people that have tried to do work on it for all those years, and all whatever idea they had, or whatever electrician they had, or whatever plumber they had all those years. So you're able to not have to deal with that. You're basically, if you ground up build, you're at, you're at point zero. So as long as you're diligent about what you're doing to build that home, and documenting things like wires and duct work, and where the kitchen, like if you're putting an island in the middle of the room, you got to make sure you measure where that island's going to be, so you put the pipe in the right place, things like that, that are more in that planning and design aspect.
So what type of design are you going for? Are you going for more modern, traditional? Like what's your elegant? What are you targeting for these
One in,
round up builds?
one in College Park's going to be, it's going to be fairly classic looking outside, but the inside's going to be pretty sharp. It's going to have some really high end finishes, tiles. The kitchen's a very good sized kitchen with the larger appliances, the large range hood, the things that we look for. It's going to be over $1 million sale. So things like that that people look for. It's going to have a half bath off, in the downstairs, and then the upstairs is going to have all the bedrooms. Um, Real nice landscaping, which we don't get to do a whole bunch of in renovations. A lot of times when you do a renovation and flip, I mean, I've done some nice landscape yards here and there, but obviously that's kind of the last thing you do. And a
Hmm.
lot of times you're kind of out of budget by the time you get to landscaping. So you can, plant some plants and put down some mulch and
Yeah.
everything you see in the TV shows, but you don't get to get into it as much. So we're
So my
looking.
my question is, like, I know College Park is a particular place. When you say $1 million home ground up build, how big is $1 million home in College Park, speculatively speaking?
There, I've seen some that are smaller, but the one that we're looking at is going to be about 2,500 square feet. So we're
So
going
that's
to
a
be,
pretty good sized home, all things sold. And
oh yeah, it's
and
2,500 square foot. It's a 4, 2.5 with a
mhm.
two-car garage. Um, Pretty good size yard considering.
Yeah. So are you sort of targeting to be like a 2,500, 3,000 square foot ground up built homes? Is that your like sweet spot? You're like, I like building this size? Because if anytime I've talked to someone, they everyone has their niche they enjoy doing. Did you have a niche yourself that you enjoy doing?
No, not yet. I definitely can function in any space as far as the custom version of it. We built a custom 4-car garage with an elevator. Um, that So the mother-in-law suite was on the second level.
That's cool.
So we've been able to, everything that we've ever taken on, we've been able to address. And there's a lot of challenges behind the scene in construction. There's a lot of things that people don't see, that things don't line up, or where the engineer said you should put the air handler doesn't work because there's no room above it to put the duct work. And there's things that go from paper to, from plan to execution. Obviously there's always some challenges along the way. The large home builders that build spec homes, they've kind of got all that stuff ironed out, which is why they're able to offer, a value home, a spec home, because they've built the home so many times that they've ironed all those little things out, so they know where the air handler is going to go, for instance. But custom home buildings, it's an interesting space, and we're still going to be doing renovations. But there's only so many homes that need renovating in Orlando,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you're
flipping.
absolutely right. So that was going to bring another question up. Like, I mean, it seems like you have a bright future ahead of you. What's your concern moving forward in your industry that I think might be a hurdle? You mentioned a little bit about the limitation of availability of like doing renovation stuff, but what do you see the biggest concern from your perspective to be?
I think we're going to see a couple things in the industry. One is the rule books continue. They keep moving the target on things like national, for instance, national electric code is always being moved forward. So we have safer and safer homes, which is great. But I think at some point we're just going to run out of the people that write the books don't have a job if they don't keep adding stuff. So we've onboarded so many safety features and so many things, but unfortunately they have a lot of cost involved. So I think that the municipalities at some point need to kind of level out on their dedication to over combing. I mean, we've got homes that are 70 years old that are still standing and work just fine. And we build homes now and we put just an astronomical amount of strapping and safety and pipes and there's a lot of there's some redundancy, which some of it's good, but at some point it just needs to kind of level out, in my opinion, because we're getting to the point where people are like, oh, I can't buy an entry level home, and you're like, well, yeah, because they basically make us build a home that's got so many features to it that you don't see, that it's very hard to offer it as a product. The other thing I think you're going to see in my industry in the next 20 years is you're going to have more automation in the initial building phase. I don't think I'm in my lifetime going to see robots coming and installing toilets, but I do think that you're going to see, and you're already starting to see, um, like where the shell of the home is built either on or off site, brought to site, and then the humans will come and finish it out. But I think that's the only way that we're going to continue to house the populations that we have in this country and other countries.
Okay. Motivating statement before we close out today. What would you tell someone that says, "Hey, you know what? I really was impressed by what Elliot said." How would you motivate them to say, "Hey, let's do this. Let's do a renovation. Let's do a custom built home. Let's do rehab, flip." What would you share with them as to say motivationally, like you could do it?
I think that definitely there is a huge satisfaction to doing what I do, or I wouldn't do it, to be honest. So I think that if you've done your research and it's something that you feel like you want to do, then I think that you should take those steps, but make sure that you research if you're doing it yourself or if you're getting someone to do it, make sure that you research your contractors, have a good plan, and have a little bit of a contingency fund because a lot of first time projects definitely go over budget.
That's cool. Well, Elliot, this was a pleasure. I really enjoyed you having on the show. You're a wealth of knowledge and a breadth of interesting information you shared with me. I loved it. I hope the listeners enjoy it too. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
This episode was made and produced by i4 Web Services. Visit i4webservices.com to learn more.